For decades, loyalist groups in Northern Ireland waged war against the Catholic IRA. Now the paramilitaries feel betrayed on all sides in the Brexit dispute and are giving up their support for the 1998 peace agreement. Is that just saber rattling, or is there a risk of violence returning after Brexit in Northern Ireland? The port of Larne seems almost deserted on one windy March morning. A single cargo ship that has arrived from the Scottish Cairn Ryan is at anchor. Because of the corona lockdown, the shop windows are locked and the pubs are closed, which gives the Northern Irish coastal town a ghostly appearance. The ferry port of Larne advertises to be the starting point for the shortest crossing to the British Isles, but the port has recently hit the headlines mainly as the Irish sea border. Organic products, food, agricultural goods, soil for plant beds, everything is now being checked, complains Mayor Peter Johnston, pointing to the barracks on the port area where inspectors have been carrying out the new Brexit goods checks since the beginning of January. You would even have to bring a vaccination card with you for pets, but because of the pandemic, nobody is traveling at the moment, he says. Larne is a stronghold of Protestant unionists for whom Northern Ireland is an inseparable part of the United Kingdom. The young mayor of the Democratic Unionist Party DUP, that explains what he says, and his voters are correspondingly angry about the implementation of Brexit, which they clearly agreed to in the 2016 referendum. Not the whole of Northern Ireland, but those people have. In the exit negotiations, Brussels and Dublin opposed goods controls at the land border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. In the end, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson agreed to a protocol that effectively leaves Northern Ireland in the EU internal market. As a result, the Brexit border now runs in the sea between the British Isles and Northern Ireland. What, from the point of view of Catholic nationalists, brings the dream of a united Ireland closer, but offends the unionists and heats up the political climate. In February, Mayor Johnston temporarily withdrew staff from the port after suspects took down inspectors' license numbers, and relevant graffiti can still be seen in Larne today. All employees at the maritime border are targets emblazoned on a board wall, or RIP GFA, a death sentence for the Good Friday Agreement, which ended the Northern Ireland conflict in 1998 after 3 bloody decades. The graffiti probably came from loyalists who are anchored in Larne, but also in the Protestant working class neighbourhoods of Belfast and intertwined with the paramilitaries from times of the what they call the Troubles. The social worker Neue Gallagher is well connected in the scene and agrees to a meeting at a neutral location in Belfast with a German newspaper. The burly man in his mid-40s, who with his tattooed arms and long beard is half a rocker and half a fantasy hero, is bothered by the protocol for practical and fundamental reasons. Internet orders from Great Britain would no longer or only be closed because of the customs bureaucracy and delivered at high cost. In addition, the Northern Irish were the only British to remain subject to foreign EU rules and judges. And they mean that's undemocratic and stinks to heaven, as we would say in Germany. Neave grew up in a Catholic area and was beaten every day as a boy because a school uniform made him out as a Protestant. In the Troubles, as the Civil War, or whatever you call this war is called, he witnessed murders and attacks by the Irish Republican Army, the IRA. He leaves it open whether he was active in the paramilitaries himself. Today, as a member of Protestant orders, he takes part in the arduous marches every summer, during which the Unionists celebrate their British identity with flags, uniforms, and brass music. But the feeling that the government in London will not reciprocate the Unionist loyalty in case of doubt is deeply rooted in the community. Neave draws a parallel from Margaret Thatcher, who gave Dublin a say in Northern Ireland in the 1985 Anglo-Irish Treaty, to Boris Johnson, who economically slammed Northern Ireland into Ireland in order to enforce Brexit for England. I don't want a return of violence, says Neave, but this protocol is the last straw. Anyone looking for clues in quarters like the Shankill or in North Belfast will come across radical wall paintings, conflicting characters and a shadowy world full of hints and contradictions. Security fences between Protestant and Catholic quarters show that the Troubles' wound have only healed superficially. The IRA and the main Protestant paramilitaries, the Ulster Volunteer Force, the UVF, and the Ulster Defence Association, the UDA, have officially surrendered their weapons. On paper, they are banned as terrorist organizations. Many former fighters have found shelter as social workers in neighborhood groups and organizations for the prevention of violence. IRA splinter groups and several associations of the UVF and the UDA have also drifted into gang crime. They control prostitution, drug trafficking, and the lives of the residents. In a windowless back room somewhere in Belfast sit two seasoned men who only want to identify themselves in the newspaper as high-ranking representatives of the Loyalist Community Council, the LCC. The LCC is the umbrella organization of the paramilitaries and represents the UVF, the UDA, and the Red Hand Commando, which were responsible for a third of all 3,500 fatalities during the Troubles. The LCC recently made headlines with a letter to the government in London. In it, the paramilitaries withdrew their support for the Good Friday Agreement, which regulates the division of power between nationalists and unionists, and which will one day provide for a referendum on a united Ireland. The men insist that this is not a threat. Rather, the paramilitaries try to avert a return of violence. But the younger generation's displeasure is so great that the situation threatens to get out of control. They say, without lockdown, we would have street protests long ago, says an LCC representative. If I were 20 years old, I would know what I would do, says the other. The fact that it is not the LCC press spokesman, but the high-ranking representatives who appear for the interview with the German newspaper show that the paramilitaries want to emphasize their warnings. In London and Brussels, they underestimate how serious the situation is, says one. The loyalist population feels downright humiliated. During the Brexit negotiations, local politicians from Sinn Féin, formerly the political arm of the IRA, and the government in Dublin drove European journalists and diplomats into the inner Irish border and threatened with the spectre of a return of IRA violence, and had success. The paramilitaries kept quiet for a long time, but now they are calling for the Northern Ireland Protocol to be terminated. If Brexit makes controls necessary, then these belong on the international border between the United Kingdom and the Irish Republic. According to the British Secret Services, the paramilitaries have around 12,500 members. The LCC representatives even speak of tens of thousands. Measured against the total Northern Irish population of 1.8 million, in which the Catholics could soon form a majority for the first time, the Loyalists are a fringe group. But the resentment is widespread. The unionist parties are now taking legal action against the protocol. Retailers complain about delivery problems that threaten to worsen if health certificates are required for the import of British animal products after the transition period has expired. After the British government had denied for months that new controls would be necessary, it has now extended the transition period to October on its own initiative and unilaterally, whereupon Brussels has taken legal action. The EU fears that unhealthy products and contraband could seep into its domestic market from the UK. But they also see the controls as a consequence of the hard Brexit that the British are now supposed to feel. Most Northern Irish are hoping for a pragmatic solution to reduce controls. A return of violence would meet with overwhelming rejection. For this reason, too, Matthew O'Toole does not believe that the paramilitaries will take up arms again. O'Toole is a member of the regional parliament for the moderately nationalist SDLP party, and like many Republicans, he's in favor of a referendum on a unified Ireland in the foreseeable future. He says, "I have the impression that many unionists are playing up the risk of violence in order to pursue political goals. Aaron Edwards, a paramilitary expert at the Royal Military Academy in Sandhurst, warns against underestimating the loyalists. The paramilitaries are currently recruiting a lot of offspring, but are currently relying on peaceful means, he says. But when these are exhausted, they have the capacity and the will to create unrest. For one thing, nobody knows exactly how many weapons the paramilitaries still have, explains Edwards. On the other hand, there is a trend towards small cells and terrorist organizations around the world. That is why even a few extremists could trigger a chain reaction. For example, in the summer when the Unionist orders march through Belfast. Trevor Greer is one of the few loyalists to speak openly about a paramilitary past. He welcomed the German journalists in the barren living room of a brick terraced house. The local news is on TV in the background. As a teenager, he was recruited in Belfast in the 1980s, he says. I was on tour for 9 years, then I was arrested for illegally possessing weapons. When he got out of prison, the Good Friday Agreement was just around the corner. The armed fighter became a social worker who has renounced violence and who today describes himself as a moderate loyalist. During the Troubles, we knew that the IRA was the enemy, says the man in the mid-50s. But today, on social media, he observed that young loyalists and anonymous profiles incited violence, but it remained unclear who it was directed against. Against the government in Dublin, the EU, the Northern Irish Regional Government? Trevor put some of the blame on the Democratic Unionist Party as the largest unionist party. The DUP was the first to support Brexit. Then they supported Theresa May's minority government in London, but opposed their Brexit plans for a customs partnership between the whole of the UK and the EU. Then the DUP threw itself at the neck of the Brexit hardliner Boris Johnson, who negotiated a solution with Brussels that is much more unfavourable for the Unionists than that of May. Could the anger of the loyalists ultimately even discharged against the government in London? Trevor says we feel betrayed by Westminster. But whoever fights the British government as a loyalist is committing treason. And so, I talked about this very recently, but I want to bring up the topic again because this is the main focus point about the whole Brexit discussion we have at the moment. What we all want is to keep peace in Northern Ireland. But there's one other thing. To do this, the EU can't give up all its rules and regulations. And not only their rules and regulations, also the WTO rules and regulations. The UK unilaterally decided to leave the single market and of course is now responsible for this decision. And you can't, like a lot of Brexiteers do, just blame it on the EU. The rules were clear. The third country rules were being made up with the help of the UK. And I can't stress that one often enough. And now they are in force. And everybody knew this is going to happen. And in this small sector of flexibility that we have there has to be a solution. For the unity of the United Kingdom, Theresa May's plan would have been much better than the now Northern Ireland Protocol. But the Northern Ireland Protocol is now necessary because the backstop by Theresa May was rejected. And there is no better plan. If the UK would start thinking and get their stuff together and decide that the backstop would be the better choice, that would be better for everyone. But they want their independence, and so they probably will not do that. And so we will have this discussion for quite some time, I'm sure. If you want to stay informed, please subscribe to my channel. Auf Wiedersehen.